Hey guys, in this tutorial I'm going to teach you how to use Python Selenium to locate and interact with elements that you find on websites. So, real quick, what is an element? An element is a generic term for pretty much any HTML tag. So some examples would be this text, or these buttons, or these icons. Pretty much anything you can see on a website is an element. Now to get started, all this code that you see on your screen now was explained in a previous video, so check that out if you need some help. But the only thing that's different is now instead of using a website path, I am now just using a local HTML file. And that file looks like this. So here's what the website looks like in your browser, just a really simple two entry field website. So this will just be used for example purposes. Let's look at the HTML code for this website. And the way I do that is I right click and hit view page source. And now I'll just make that bigger for us. So here we can see we have 4 elements we want to interact with. The first being this welcome banner, then we have an input for the username, an input for the password, and a submit button. So in previous tutorials, we used this name attribute to locate the overall element. But you might notice that this input field, the submit button, does not have name. It also doesn't have ID, so we'll have to use something else there. And likewise, this welcome banner only has a CSS class. So here we'll use a CSS selector, and I'll show you how to do all those things right now. Okay, so here on the left we have our code, and on the right we have that HTML source code we were just looking at. So let's start by locating all of the elements. So for our first one, let's use this username field, as it has an ID, so things should be pretty easy. It's very similar to how we used name before. So I'll say txt_user is equal to driver dot find element, and we're going to find that element by ID, and the ID we're looking for is user. So here you can see I'm specifying look for an element that has the ID attribute and look for a value of user. So txt_user is going to be equal to this input username field. So likewise, let's do the same thing for password. I'll say txt_password is equal to driver.findElement, but this time we're going by name. So you can see we don't have an ID attribute in this password field. So the next best thing for us would be this name. And that name is password. Next, let's handle the submit button. So this is a little bit different because there's no ID and there's no name. So here we're going to use an Xpath. So I'll say btn submit is equal to driver.findElement by Xpath, and that is going to be equal to something. So this Xpath is something you can make yourself, but let me show you a trick. So I'll go back to Google, or I'll go back to Chrome, and now I'll look at this login button on the actual website. If I right click it and hit inspect, now it'll highlight itself in the actual source code. And from here I can right click and hit copy Xpath. So from this little drop down, I'm going to hit copy Xpath. And now I'll go back to my code and just paste whatever it copied. So it seemed to have messed up our string a little bit, and I'll just drag this over for us. But instead of using double quotes, I'm going to put this in single quotes, as it's actually using double quotes here. So Xpath is how your web browser can identify elements. What it's doing is it's looking for the login form and then looking for the third input in there. So you don't need to know how to make Xpath yourself, just right click and hit copy Xpath. Super easy for us. So for that last one, we want to get this banner. And this is a little bit different because now we're going to say, let's say LBL for label. So our label banner is equal to driver.findElement. And this time we're going by CSS selector. So this is going to ask us for how we're going to select this element via CSS. And that would be, we're looking for a paragraph tag with a class of banner. So if this notation doesn't make a whole lot of sense, just brush up on some CSS, but we're saying a paragraph, and this dot denotes that we're looking for a class called banner. Now before we move on here, I want to go back and explain this notation I've been using. So whenever I'm dealing with a bunch of elements on a web page, it's easy to get them confused because often there's multiple elements relating to one type of information. So the way I handle this is I put little abbreviations at the beginning of my variable names That way it's clear to me that, oh, this is a button, oh, this is some type of label, whether it's a P tag or an H tag, whatever. And likewise, this is a text entry field. So just a little tip for you and your team, but it's totally optional. Okay, so now that we've located the elements, let's type credentials into the input fields. Let's retrieve the banner text to show how to get information out of the website. And then lastly, we'll do the submit button. So to start, let's type the credentials. And a good habit to get into is to always clear a text entry field before you actually type your own text into it. That way, cookies and caching can't interfere with your test. So I'll say the name of my variable, txtuser.clear. So all that's going to do is delete all the text in that field. Then I can say txtuser.sendKeys, kwilson. So let's say that's my username. So now because of this clear function, I know kwilson is going to be the only thing in that text field, no matter what cookies or cache is present. So I'll do the same thing for my password. I'll say txtpassword.clear and txtpassword.sendKeys, and then I'll use a great password like 123456, and that looks good to me. So now we're going to print the banner text. And the way we do that is we say print, and then the name of our banner, so LBL banner, dot get attribute. So now we need to specify an attribute, and I'll say inner HTML. So because I'm using a P tag right here, I want to use inner HTML to get the value of what's in between these P tags, which is welcome. Now, depending on what you're trying to pull values out of, you might want to change inner HTML to the string value or something else. It just depends on what element you're trying to pull from. But what I'll do after this is say time.sleep 3. So I'm going to sleep for 3 seconds. I'm going to pause my program for 3 seconds. That way I have some time to see all this stuff get entered. And then once we're done sleeping, I'm going to say btn submit dot click. So all I'm going to do is click that submit button, and then I'm going to sleep for another 3 seconds before closing the browser. So let's run our code. It's going to open up. Oh, you can see I put one too many of those parentheses. So let's run our code and hopefully no more errors. And it's going to open up on my other monitor, so I'll drag it over, and you can see it typed our credentials, it's waiting, it hit the button, and you can see that in our address bar, we had some extra text. You can go back and pause that if you want, but basically, we can see that everything worked. We saw that our text was entered into the user fields. We then can see that welcome was printed out over here on our console, thanks to this statement, and then we hit the submit button, which posted all the information up in our address bar, and then we close the web browser. Alright, so that covers how to use Python Selenium to locate and interact with different elements on a website. So I hope you learned something. Like the video if you liked it. Thanks for watching.